Welcome back to episode 258 of the Tallboy Radio Podcast. And as we always say, who knows where it goes when that beer flows. Apologies for the bass in my voice, and I'm still getting over a bit of a gnarly case of the flu, but let's not let that put us off. And we'll say hello to Gaza. How you doing, dude?
Yeah, I'm good. Evening all, evening in the world. I hope you're all good out there in listener land and looking forward to this episode. And I say pretty much every time we have a guest on, and that's a little teaser as to it isn't just the normal trio this evening, but it's always nice when we have a guest on, a guest that we haven't had on before. So virgin territory, as they always say. So really looking forward to this and looking forward to where it goes.
Indeed. And Dave, how are you doing, dude?
Yeah, I'm all right, thanks. And I'm glad that Gaz didn't give too much away there. We wouldn't want our listeners to cotton on to what we're going to talk about.
Great. Very nice.
I love it.
Very nice little segue there. So before we say hello to our guest, let's say hello to Big Tiddy Tidwell as well, who has, to be fair, been known to join us on some of the episodes that we like to do about politics.
Tiddy.
So Dave will try and keep his opinions to Donald Trump to himself tonight.
Yeah, so I forgot I've got to be somewhere else for the next hour. Hi, Tiddy.
Tiddy, give him hell.
Give him hell, yeah, absolutely. But no, we are joined by a guest. We're joined by Jacob. Did you want to say hello, dude, and tell us a little bit about what you're going to be talking about today?
Hi, everyone. So my name is Jakob Cotton, and I have been brought onto the podcast to talk about my research to North Korea. So I have studied North Korea for the last 7 years or so. I became fascinated with it at the age of like 15 or so. And interestingly, my interest in North Korea actually came from my interest in IT, believe it or not. And the reason for that was because I was doing a bit of reading and I found out that North Korean computers, rather than running on, say, Windows or Mac, they run on something else called Red Star operating system. And I found out that that, like, for example, this Red Star thing that they use had lots of like security features that were inbuilt to stop people from talking about things that the regime wasn't a fan of. So it has features for example, like periodically taking screenshots that you can't delete, and like tapping into keywords that you type, keeping tabs on its users. So after that, I started to like watch more documentaries and stuff. And in retrospect, now that I know quite a lot more, quite a lot of these documentaries were pretty rubbish. But I became fascinated with primarily the human rights side of things, because North Korea, it really has no parallel for its human rights for record. Like you do not have freedom of the press, freedom of assembly. It is on the like the world press freedom index. I think it is it is the second most unfree press in the world, ranking just above Turkmenistan. So yeah, I read more and more over the next few years. I followed really closely the meetings that took place between Kim Jong Un and Trump uh, back in 2018 and 19, and it started to become pretty clear after a while that my interest in North Korea was quite deep, and it was here to stay. So last year, I ended up um, put, putting an application through to study on a master's degree program in North Korean studies at the University of Central Lancashire, which is in Preston. So I have just done that full time for a year, and I wrote my dissertation about the rights of people with disabilities living in North Korea. So yeah, that is how I became interested in a very heavy and to some quite unusual topic.
To some, I would say to most, but yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah.
It's an unusual entry level. When you start off being interested in IT, you might be the only person who's ever gone down that route. I'm not too sure. I will say this though. I am quite familiar with the University of Central Lancashire in Preston.
Okay.
My wife went to university there, and I have a great fondness for Preston. I've had some very, very good nights out in that town or city, actually, as I believe it is now. God bless them. So yeah, that really is a very interesting route into something that is quite peculiar. Gaz, North Korea. Got a background in IT. Has it ever tickled your fancy?
It wouldn't be top of my bucket list to go, I'll be honest with you. I mean, look, I thought you were going to ask me, well, what do I know about North Korea? And the capital is Pyongyang, and I know that's I say pretty much about it in terms of a factual sense. I mean, obviously, there's various old wives' tales about propaganda and the fact that pretty much every North Korean thinks that they've won every World Cup since 1970, whenever it was, and they parade the trophy round, and you're not allowed the internet, and there's no freedom of speech, and you're not allowed to do this, and basically North Korean nationals are not allowed to travel outside of North Korea, and all of their tourism is internal because actually they're not allowed to travel out, and if you travel out, then basically you get hunted down, like that famous Liam Neeson, I will hunt you down, I'll find you and I'll kill you type thing. So yeah, it wouldn't be something that I would automatically think with an IT background of somewhere where I would want to work or even study. But I suppose if you're working in IT and you saw where IT was going, and you think, well, actually the flip side of that is the internet is a wonderful place. Well, why not consider what IT is like in a place where they're not allowed the internet per se? And I know some people are and some people aren't, but yeah, it's an interesting route that you took, Jacob. I'll be honest with you, from an IT point of view, because it wouldn't have been top of a lot of people's lists in terms of I've got a background in IT. I know what I'll go and study North Korea.
Yeah, well, I haven't really got a background in IT, really. I just was quite interested in like computer operating systems and stuff.
Okay.
At that time, but I was the only one on my master's program who came from a media background,
Right.
because
Okay.
that's what I did my undergrad in. So yeah, but yes, speaking of the internet you mentioned, yes, that is right. Most people in North Korea don't really have access to the internet in the way that we do. Quite privileged people, say in Pyongyang,
Yeah.
they do have some access, but there is actually an internal internet called the Kwangmyong network, which is sort of like an intranet.
Yeah.
So the internet within an internet, so to
Yeah.
speak. So yeah.
So, just out of interest, then, so like one of the things that you mentioned there is in terms of Korea there, or North Korea rather, doesn't have a great track record in Northern, in terms of, what did we say? What was the phrase again? I forget now. But anyway, they finished above Turkmenistan in terms of their
Human right. Was it human?
That's
Yeah.
the phrase I was after. Should
Press freedoms. Yeah.
yeah.
But human rights wise, yeah, North Korea does get compared quite a lot to Turkmenistan, which gets called the North Korea of Central Asia.
Right.
They are two countries which are very akin in the sense that Turkmenistan also has lots of really weird laws and a like reverence around the leader and stuff. But I haven't come on here to talk about Turkmenistan. But yeah.
Fair play, fair play. So I'll be interested to know then, what's it like for the average North Korean then? What is their life like? And can you share any of those unusual rules that they have to live their day by?
Yeah, so North Korea is a country that you have to be really careful when you're reading about it, because like I've heard it said that if you want an easy job as a journalist, then you just have to write a story about North Korea, because nobody is ever going to know if you're actually telling the truth or not. You have to be quite careful, but North Korea is a place where people don't live very kind of, what's the word? Don't exactly live lavish lives. People are very much getting by, staying under the radar of the surveillance state, with what it describes as a monolithic ideological system where everyone is all meant to be united around a single cause, which is a devotion to the ruling Workers' Party of Korea and the three leaders. The first leader of North Korea was somebody called Kim Il Sung, and Kim Il Sung was a very interesting character, in that he was a guerrilla fighter who helped to, well, he fought against the Japanese, because at that time Korea was under the occupation of the Japanese, and so Kim Il Sung was this fighter who had like quite a lot of legend built up around him, and everyone is taught to revere Kim Il Sung's achievements, and he built up a giant cult of personality around himself, and that then carried through to his son. They have a concept in North Korea, that lineage of people. So Kim Il Sung, Kim Jong Il, Kim Jong Un, they are all part of something called the Paektu bloodline, which basically it is viewed as giving them legitimacy to rule, and being part of the Kim family basically means that you're like the shit. So yeah, North Korea is very much it's very ideological. Ideology is extremely important in North Korea. In and we don't really have that in the West, do we? We don't. We look up to politicians and we talk about policy and stuff, but we don't really talk about guiding ideas. Whereas in North Korea, they do. And they have in North Korea, Kim Il Sung in the 1950s created an ideology that North Koreans follow, and this ideology is called Juche, which is spelled Juche. And basically, what Juche is it is a type of Marxism-Leninism. It is a type of communism that basically stresses economic, political, and military self-reliance. So, in a nutshell, what that essentially means is that the Korean people need to become the masters of their own destiny and to fend for themselves. Essentially, it's kind of a reaction to Japanese an American influence. And so this Juche ideology is a big thing in North Korea, and everyone is expected to follow that line. So yeah, in a nutshell, what is life like for the average North Korean? It is not lavish in any sense of the word generally, and it is extremely ideological as well.
I think from what I will sort of understand and what I can gather from doing a bit of reading, a bit of research as such, there's effectively there's no religion in North Korea. Is that correct? Because everybody that either they don't allow it or they're not. It's not something that you would openly follow. And is it a case of you follow the political party or the Juche, if that's what you're saying, that everybody subscribes to? So there's no, there's no Christianity, there's no Hinduism, there's no Judaism, there's no nothing, and it's just that's it. You just follow that Juche.
Yeah, well, North Korea, there is religion in the north, but it has there is a lot of persecution around Christianity, like and there isn't really any observation of like religious practices publicly. But that's another thing. I noticed that you spoke about Juche in the religious concept. That is a Juche is not a religion. It does share a hell of a lot of similarities with religions, in the sense that Juche actually says in the writings of the North Korean leaders, there is a lot said about how people live like a material life and also a political life as well that is more important and carries on after death and things like that. And so in a sense that like it's a little bit like Buddhism in some ways, in the sense that it's not a religion in the traditional kind of sense, but it's like a guiding philosophy in a way.
Okay.
But it is it's absolutely not a religion in the same way that like
Right.
Christianity or something like that is. But yeah, it's extremely important. That there is a lot of stuff online, like quite a lot of people say, "Oh, did you know that North Koreans have to worship the Kim family as if they're gods or something?" And I get where you're coming from with that, but it's not a very good way of looking at it. They aren't treated like gods, but they are absolutely very revered, but not like prayed to and stuff.
Right. They're
So,
followed, but they're not prayed to.
yeah. And like the yeah, like I was reading, there isn't really. I mean, there is religious imagery used sometimes in North Korean media. For example, when Kim Jong Il, the current leader Kim Jong Un's father, died in 2011, the North Korean state media. I don't quote me on this because I don't know for a fact that it's true, but I read that state media reported that that there was like a thunderous cracking of the ice on the lake of the sacred mountain, and it was all very Jesus. So you do get a lot of that, yeah, but yeah, that pretty much sums it up. Highly revered, but not really treated as supernatural, so to speak.
Yeah.
No, that's interesting. Like you said, they do love an iconic story about some of their leaders, and we hear stories about Kim Jong Un and his ability at golf, and like you say, the fact that they continually win the World Cup. And who are we to say that isn't the case?
Well, you say that.
Well, okay, yeah, it isn't the case.
Yeah, it isn't the case.
You
Yeah.
see, I'm going to pull you up on that. Actually, the thing of the golf thing, that was a story that was put out by ESPN, and that was not about Kim Jong Un. That was actually about Kim Jong Il, his dad, and it said something like he scored an insane amount of holes in one, and then he never played golf again or something. But it had no source, and there is no reason to believe that that's true in any sense.
Whereas Trump would probably say the same in terms of his golfing career, and so and whether there's proof or not that he has scored a significant number of hole-in-ones or not, he will probably claim he has. But
yeah, he's
absolutely. He absolutely has, Gaz. I'm not quite sure why you're knocking the future President Trump.
I'm sad, and I know he does play golf, and he's a very avid golfer, as am I. But
to be fair, Gaz probably also has made some very serious claims about his golf. No, I'm joking. Gaz actually is a very good golfer. But no, it's interesting that. So Big Titty shared a few stories as well, which I'll read some of those out. So it's illegal to smile on the anniversary of Kim Il-sung's death. Traditionally, like he agrees with yourself, North Koreans being atheists, and in certain cases, if you commit a crime, your entire family can be punished. Now, I don't know if any of those are true, but just in terms of what you said there about Kim Jong Il and his golfing antics, if indeed there is no found in truth in that,
yeah,
how much can we trust what we're told by our media about North Korea and their current fabulous leader, or whatever they want to call him? So we know our media is not as trustworthy as perhaps we thought it was 10-15 years ago, and we've sort of seen that. And certainly the Americans have got their own concerns in their media. We've always looked at the way that things are portrayed in communist countries and the way that the media is controlled and is used to share a narrative. How guilty of that are we? How guilty are we of buying into the narrative of North Korea and Kim Jong Un, when indeed some of that might not be founded in truth?
That's a really good question, and my honest answer is that most people are very guilty, myself included. Like everyone forgets that they are also not immune to propaganda, and you do have to be very careful with what you read, especially when it comes to North Korea. There is just all sorts of utter crap out there. Uh, Honestly, with that, I wouldn't even know where to start. There's just so much wrong with the way that the media covers North Korea sometimes, and uh, I'm just not sure where to even start with that. Let me have a think. My brain is short circuiting a little bit because it's quite a broad question.
That's Turbo Radio for you. We could do that.
We ask all the searching questions.
Yeah, we do. We do.
But I do think if you went back to, if you just giving you a little bit of time to think, Jacob, if you went back to sort of, for example, I know the propaganda surrounding the world wars and what we were led to believe was the case that actually then transpired that wasn't the case, and I'm sure that if you were living in Germany, you would have certain things, news stories that would paint sort of the Western world in a very negative light, similarly to the way that our media would have painted sort of the German alliance in a very negative light. So, if you're in North Korea, you're probably being told that the Western is X, Y, and Z. Yeah, if you live in the Western world, you're probably being told that North Korea is X, Y, and Z. So I take your point, Ad. I suppose that there's lies all over the place abound, whether you're sort of pro North Korea or anti North Korea, and actually, I suppose in a way, for me, the problem is there's not enough. There's not as many journalists can get into North Korea to actually tell the truth, if that makes sense, because you just can't get access to it, or you're led to believe you can't get access to it. And is that the case, sort of thing? So, can we report on the truth? Because actually we can't get to the truth because we can't get into North Korea, and is that part of the problem? And I don't know. Is a simple answer.
Indeed.
Yeah, I mean, access is obviously a massive barrier.
Yeah.
And the other thing that this is what I was trying to put into words a minute ago, is the fact that you don't have to agree with something to understand it.
Yeah.
And when you have a system as oppressive as North Korea, people express outrage at that quite rightly, but it's important to do that in a way that is actually true. You can't just smear constantly without any backing, because for starters, it's not an intellectual argument, and it won't actually help to build bridges as well, because I am also me and everyone else that I studied with think that engagement with the North Korean government on certain things is much more constructive than confrontation, and I think that and that leads me on to Trump as well, because obviously when Trump was in office, things were very tumultuous back in 2017, when the whole crisis happened around remember when Trump said, for example, that North Korea was going to be met with fire and fury or whatever. When all of that kicked off, that was really awful. But at the same time, I think that that the meetings that took place between Kim and Trump were actually, even though I hate Trump, were extremely exciting, actually. And we all think this. We all think that that Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party are probably just going to continue in the same direction and make no progress whatsoever. In order to make progress with North Korea, you have to engage with them, which is obviously it gives way to so many different moral dilemmas, but it's incredibly important to speak to them, and believing that North Korea is going to denuclearize anytime soon in the current climate is just completely deluded. It's not going to happen. North Korea so last year, at the beginning of last year, North Korea's nuclear status was codified into North Korean law, and Kim Jong-un declared it as irreversible. And I think that, as much as it's horrible, I think that we need to take that on board. It unfortunately will be irreversible if everything carries on as it is.
Interesting. So one of the things we talked about earlier as well, actually, interestingly enough, was international politics. So Trump, love him or hate him, is a very bombastic character and can polarize opinions. Someone else out there in the world that can do that is Putin as well. And as Gaz mentioned earlier, actually in the green room, that this fella himself. So they had a bit of a defense agreement. Is that correct to say they had a defense agreement with North Korea?
Yes, that's right. I can't remember when it was specifically. Let me have a look. It was. It was back in June, I want to say. I think it was June. But yeah, they signed a mutual aid agreement, where essentially the two countries agreed to provide military assistance to one another in the event of aggression, which is quite broad, but and since then, North Korean troops have been sent to Ukraine as well, which is very worrying. So estimates as to how many North Korean troops there are in Ukraine vary, but there is thought to be around 10,000 over there now. That is something that North Korean troops in Ukraine. There is quite a lot of misinformation about that, about their activities, what it is exactly that they're doing. But it is going to be really interesting, and of course, very sad to see how it pans out as well. But yeah, that is certainly concerning. And Kim Jong-un also referred to Russia's war as a sacred war against the West as well.
That is interesting, because there are, and I don't want to get too conspiratorially on this, but there are different perceptions of the war in Ukraine, the purposes behind it, and the reasons why it has occurred, whether it is geographical or whether, well, it's certainly geographical, but whether it is more to do with the encroachment of the West into sort of Russian territory and moving NATO, United Nations a little bit further that way, and maybe protecting some of the assets. And the likes of Zelensky, love him or hate him, are certainly perceived one way by some and one way by another. Should we be concerned by what we're seeing in terms of North Korean involvement in that escalation, shall we say?
Yeah. So the thing with what's happening in Ukraine is that the troops are actually largely being kept kind of away from the front line, from my understanding. So they they aren't really seeing a great deal of combat at the moment. It's largely just like rear duties, like guard posts and stuff. From my understanding, obviously, what's going on in Ukraine with the North Korean troops being there, it also, even though the North Korean involvement isn't super, what's the word, kind of they aren't so involved on the front. It does also raise concerns about like conflicts by proxy and stuff, like with South Korea also sending aid to Ukraine and stuff. And yeah, it's I don't. It'll be interesting to see how it pans out, and I think these soldiers are also there largely for a symbolic purpose as well, to show a kind of friendship between Russia and North Korea. So yeah, it's a very symbolic thing, and it is definitely very worrying.
Yeah.
But yeah, and North Korean artillery and stuff is being used quite a lot by the Russians, and again, it'll be interesting to see how it all pans out. But it is very, very sad, though. Absolutely.
Yeah.
One question I had, and we sort of in a way spoke about it in the green room beforehand. And there was obviously the notification and stuff in terms of sort of martial law in South Korea and the escalation of South Korea. And excuse me for my ignorance as such. What are the political and potentially military sort of ramifications from South Korea, North Korea, and will the martial law instigated in South Korea have an impact on North Korea, or how does that play out? And I don't know enough about it so geopolitically to understand that, and I just wonder whether or not maybe you do, or would that have an impact?
So, are you asking me in summary what the effect of the South Korean
Yeah.
martial law was
Yes.
on the North?
Yeah.
So obviously, martial law being enacted in South Korea in a way is a massive propaganda win for the North.
Yeah.
First of all, in the sense that it allows North Korea to say that it's the stable one, and that and that things like that happen with weak leadership and such. But to be honest with you, haven't really. It's quite bad of me. I haven't really been keeping my eye on North Korean state media that much very recently. I don't really think that they've said a great deal about it.
Yeah.
I don't think that it's really being talked about that much. But yeah, it's a massive propaganda win. And I'm sure Kim Jong Un was sat back with popcorn watching it all unfold.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt.
Yeah, North Korean made popcorn.
Yeah, absolutely. Best popcorn in the world.
Allegedly.
I've got a fairly philosophical question,
Okay.
and this like many of my questions on subjects I know little about, maybe completely ignorant and stupid.
No, it's okay.
But let's assume that North Korea was a place where people are living fairly simple lives, and yes, they have restrictions on the kinds of media consumption and world events, news, and all that sort of stuff that we have. But the trade-off, the positive trade-off, is they don't have all this sort of nonsense and social media and all the other stuff that we do have. And if they were in a situation where they had enough, decent nutrition, food, diets, health, medical services, education, if that was the case, is it really a problem that they're sheltered from the outside world? They don't have access to all of these other things that wreck so many lives around the world.
That is a really, really good question. It's a very big one, but I think so. I am definitely. I've made quite clear to the people that I studied with and people in my personal life that I am by no means a capitalist. I think that it is very. I think that North Korea is as a system, is the ultimate middle finger. It is the ultimate resistance against the status quo. But I think it's a massive disappointment and an embarrassment that it has challenged the status quo. It's tried a different system, but that in doing that, it has systematically oppressed its people and caused so much misery and pain. So I think that it's quite an abstract concept. What I'm essentially trying to say is that I think that places like North Korea are important to study to understand an alternative way of living life that may be in some ways better than how we live it, but and know what to avoid in the future, if that makes sense. So like try to pick it apart and see where has this gone wrong. I think that the idea of a country like North Korea where everyone is kind of so in North Korea they have a concept where the leadership is the father and the party is the mother. So it is the idea that the government kind of looks after you in a very like paternal socialist kind of utopia. And I think that I personally would describe myself as being a socialist. I'm not a communist, I don't think, but I think that the idea of having a government that looks after its people rather than caters to the needs of the rich is interesting. But North Korea has done that in the complete wrong way. If you look at the North Korean constitution, in the words of one of my lecturers at uni, she actually used the word beautiful to describe some parts of it, because if you looked at certain parts of the North Korean constitution, you would think that it is a paradise on earth. The constitution of North Korea, in a lot of ways, enshrines the protection of things that it doesn't protect in practice. So it enshrines freedom of the press and freedom of assembly and everything. And it seems on paper that it would be a nice place to live, but that is the total opposite of how things really are. I think that I've sort of veered off track a little bit, but to answer your question, I think that no, I don't think that if they're looked after well or anything, I don't think that restricting people from the outside world is humane or necessary in any way. Communication and access to the outside world is a fundamental human right, and I think that everything that the North Korean government is doing to its people is completely wrong. Like for example, in my dissertation, I wrote again about disability in North Korea, and disability in North Korea is a very heavy and depressing area to read about, because people with disabilities just are shunned and not looked after, and there is only like one big organization that looks after the needs of disabled people, called the KFPD, and it's North Korea. I also write in my dissertation about neurodiversity in North Korea and treatment of people with like things like autism and stuff. That is completely ignored, and there have been lots of awful, but at the same time unconfirmed reports of things like state-sanctioned sterilization and even really horrible things like infanticide, like forced abortion and stuff of disabled people, and it all makes for really harrowing reading, and I think and I wrote in my dissertation as well that if in future Kim Jong-un had international judicial action taken against him, it'll be interesting to see what how many parallels there are between North Korea's treatment of disabled people and stuff, like with Nazi Germany, just how similar the two are, because there are a lot of parallels.
That's quite sad to hear. I mean, I always think in terms of society, you judge your society on how you take care of those people who can't necessarily take care of themselves and need that extra bit of assistance, whether that be mental or physical disabilities, whether that might be, people who are disadvantaged by homelessness, whether that be their decisions that they've made or not. Very, very easy to hold judgment against them. But in terms of how we judge our societies and our governments, is how we take care of those people, and the most successful ones are the ones, I think, that seem to take care of those people who can't take care of themselves. So that's that. I mean, that's quite tragic to hear. I imagine that's quite tragic and very, very difficult to read about, if I'm really honest. And
Yeah,
maybe it's that I'm, in terms of some of these episodes, after we do them, I do go back and do a bit of further reading. That might be something I choose not to explore.
That's fair, honestly.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't blame you.
I would be curious though to know, because, like you say, it certainly sounds like Dave's identified a few areas where maybe you've got one or two things right, even if only from a perceived ideology. But is there anything that we can learn in the West from North Korea and how they deal with things? Is there anything that they've got right where perhaps we haven't got it as right?
Yeah, so that again is a really cool question. And what I was trying to say 10 minutes ago, but I kept bumbling over, was that that one of the reasons why I think that it's so important that we study places like North Korea is to learn what an alternate uh, life lifestyle could look like, and to like pick out where things have gone wrong, what's being done interestingly, and learn from it. I think that one thing that I think uh, that I do think that we should maybe learn is that is going back to the whole ideology thing. In the West, we don't really so much have like guiding ideologies in our life. We don't. We enact policy and go through our revolving doors of governments and stuff, but we don't actually think about the guiding ideas behind what it is that we're doing, and we don't think about like social justice and stuff, and like obviously North Korea North Korea claims to be thinking about that. It claims to be making all of its decisions to create a socialist utopia on Earth, but in reality, it's a warped fantasy, really. But yeah, I think that we should take uh, a lesson from that to like to think about what is our purpose, what is the type of society that we're trying to build, but not build it around the the leader or whatever. Uh, Build it around the common good, and yeah, it's hard to explain what I mean, but it's essentially what I'm trying to say is that I think that we should be thinking about the ideology and the goals, the end goals of what it is that we're trying to do.
That's interesting. Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, I think in terms of our politics, it seems to be a very rotational system where one person uses the next 5 years to blame the previous 5 years and everything that's going wrong for them. And I guess if you've got one guy who's been a dictator, is in charge, doesn't have that option to blame the guy before.
No,
it was his old man.
Yeah, Dad, you got it wrong. Oh, sorry, son. And yeah, we joke and we digress. I just wonder whether or not. Just go back to something that Dave said, a while ago. If the people in North Korea are, and I'm not saying they're happy, and I don't mean happy in terms of, outwardly, but if they're content in terms of they have enough finance to be able to afford the things that they need to live a life that they can live without the trappings of X, Y, or Z, I would argue that. And I'm not suggesting for a minute that the regime in North Korea is the right regime, but I would argue that there are quite a few people in the Western world that will say, give me that lifestyle, give me that simple lifestyle that I can provide for my family. I have enough means to be able to do that. I live a simple life. I love my family. Um, and I don't need the trappings of this and that. And I'm only buying this because I've got to, or I'm only wearing that because I've got to, and all of the social media stuff and all the internet stuff. And actually, you know what? I love my neighbor. My neighbor loves me. I love my next door neighbor. Well, yeah, you said, but I love my next door neighbor and I love my next door neighbor. But what? And there's that sense of community. And look, the persecution that you read about and you hear about, and yes, take that out. But in terms of the low, the smaller communities where everybody just pulls together and they have enough means to be able to survive as a community, yeah, and thrive, I suppose, is the wrong word, but survive in a way that they're happy. They don't know any different from what I can hear, from the sense of Jacob, what you've been saying is they don't really know any different. So who are we to say that's a poorer standard of living? They've got everything they need. They can provide for their family. They're not hungry. That they can have relative ease in terms of the resources that they can provide. So is that necessarily a bad lifestyle? I'm pretty sure there's quite a few people that are that are in the Western world go, oh, I'll subscribe to that.
The problem with that though, Gaz, is communism won't work because humans are essentially bad.
Yeah, right. Take your point.
So that is a really interesting thing to say. Absolutely, and it leads me on to my next thing that I was going to talk about, which is that there are actually some people might not realize that there are actually certain groups of activists here in the UK who actually advocate for the North Korean ideology.
Right.
So there are actually certain groups of old style communists who actually who advocate for North Korea, essentially. So one such group is called the Korean Friendship Association, and basically what they are is it's like a federation of groups that was started by this guy in Spain who has close ties to the North Korean government, and they have like chapters all across the world, and there is like one here in the UK, and like I've it's not North Korea, even amongst quite hardline communists and stuff, it is often dismissed for its human rights abuses and stuff, but that there is a small subsection of people in the communist world that do actually lend support to North Korea. I used to know someone who was I was never part of it, but I used to know someone who was a member of the Communist Party of Britain, and I once went to the pub with a bunch of them, and they were all talking about like how amazing North Korea was and everything, and and I just think to myself, what are you on? It's honestly like you can't say all that stuff without having spent spent a day in the shoes of a rural North Korean who is desperate to escape and build a better life elsewhere. Because it's really silly. I get the idea behind like not taking the news at face value and actually doing proper research into things. But honestly, you must have to do some proper mental gymnastics to end up supporting North Korea.
Yeah, interesting. I totally get you. I'm a big advocate for Morrissey's statement of not watching the news because the news designs to frighten you and to make you feel small and alone. However, I don't think Morrissey would like to push you in the way of North Korea. Certainly.
No.
I could be wrong, but I don't believe I am.
Probably more in the way of UKIP in his case.
Yeah. Well, yes, we'll gloss over. We'll gloss over.
Yeah,
his
let's go
politics.
over.
Yeah.
We don't need to talk about that.
We don't want to. We don't want to encourage any conversations about Nigel Farage. They've gone south as well. So we are at the end of this episode. We like to wrap these matters up round about the hour mark. Jacob, thank you very much for joining us. It has been a very enlightening hour that we spent with you, and I've certainly learned a lot. I had an idea about North Korea. I didn't intend that to rhyme, but it did. And and to be fair, some of my ideals were there or thereabouts. Other stuff, yeah, I think their idea. I admire their ideology. I admire the idea to do better. I admire that they want to do something for their populace, if indeed that is misplaced. And who am I to say that it's wrong? Because I can look at our government and pick faults with that if I were to choose to do so. So, Jacob, would you like to leave us with one final thought for our listeners?
That is a good question. The final thought that I would honestly like to leave everyone with is I know I've said it already, but I will say it again. Just be careful. Be careful with what you're reading. Always question things, and also, yes, North Korea is pretty funny in a lot of ways. But it is. But you should always remember that the issue of North Korea is so much more than a guy with a funny haircut telling everyone what to do. So yeah, that's it, I think, from me.
Indeed. I mean, we had our own Boris Johnson, the man with a funny haircut, telling people what to do, whether it was actually Gazza, what did you make of it all?
Yeah, it's similar to you, dude. Quite enlightening, really. I had certain perceptions and probably misconceptions of what North Korea was like. And I think Jacob's gone quite a long way to sort of try and describe the sort of the vagaries of North Korea and whether or not we are right or we are wrong in our perception. So I thank Jacob for that. I just want to again just thank you, Jacob, for coming on to our podcast, and we obviously appreciate the time that you've spent with us. And as we say with our new guests, it's fascinating to get an insight into their mind and what they're thinking and their subject matter, and it's been very, very, very insightful in terms of an educational podcast, in terms of learning more about a nation on the world that actually is quite a big player without many people realizing it's quite a big player, if that makes sense.
Indeed.
Excellent.
Dave, politically you are as far away from communism as can be without being radical for the most part. What were your thoughts on tonight's episode?
I think I'm a centre right, so I think you'd be quite a lot further away than communist than me. Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, it's always fascinating to learn new things, and particularly about the world we live in. Live in the world or on the world? On the world, on the planet, in the world. One thing the thing that I found the most interesting, which I had absolutely no idea about, which is very simple and seemingly should be an obvious bit of information, is that they have the Red Star OS.
Oh, okay, right, yeah.
That just Microsoft presumably just doesn't exist.
No,
Apple just doesn't exist.
Well, actually, yeah. Red Star isn't really as much of a big deal as it was, and quite a lot of computers in North Korea do run on Windows, and also Kim Jong Il. I've read, I think, was a very big fan of Mac. That was his preferred computing system. But yeah, Red Star has kind of gone to downhill a bit, but it was a big deal for a long time. Yeah.
There we go.
So there's another place that Bill Gates has managed to infiltrate.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Stop it on Bill Gates. It's too late in the day for Bill Gates. So we'll wrap things up, and we will join you next week when we will be talking about something entirely different whatsoever.